In the last video, we created our first reducer function right here. So now we just need to finish wiring up our useReducer inside of Square Screen. All right, let's reevaluate this line right here, now with what we know. First off, we called the useReducer. We passed in our reducer function to it. We also passed in an initial value for our state object. When we call useReducer, that gives us back two things. First off, it gives us our current state. Very similar to how with our useState hook, we had said whenever we called a set or a setter with useState, that made our component automatically re-render. In a very similar fashion, when we use useReducer right here, anytime our state object changes because of our reducer, the entire component is going to re-render. So over time, our function, this entire functional component right here, is going to be called multiple different times. Every time it gets called, the value of state is going to be slightly different. It's going to have whatever changes we made inside of our reducer function right here. Now, the very last question is, how do we actually run that reducer and make a change? Well, that's the job of this dispatch function right here. A better name for dispatch would probably be run my reducer. That would be a way better name than dispatch. Whenever we want to make a change to our state object, we're going to run my reducer, we're going to invoke it, and we're going to pass in an argument to be used as our action object. That's the entire key. So you and I are going to run my reducer. We're going to pass in some object that describes how we want to modify our state. React is then going to automatically run our reducer. And whatever we passed into the run my reducer function right here will be provided as the second argument. So then inside of here, we will inspect that second argument and decide how to change our state. Okay, so what that means is we now need to go back around to all of our onIncrease and onDecrease callbacks inside of here. And in each case, we need to make sure we call run my reducer with the appropriate action object. When I say appropriate action object, I essentially mean we have to call it with the appropriate color to change prop and the appropriate amount, either plus 15 or minus 15. So let's give it a shot. Before we add it back in, I'm going to change the name of run my reducer back here to dispatch. Now, we don't have to call it dispatch. If you want to call it run my reducer, just leave it as that. There's absolutely no requirement whatsoever to call this function dispatch. It's just convention, that's all. I'm going to leave it as dispatch just so I technically show you the right thing, but honestly, I would recommend you still call it run my reducer. Okay, so on color counter right here, for onIncrease, we're going to call dispatch, and we're going to pass in an object. Remember, this object right here is going to be showing up inside of a reducer as that action. So it needs to have a color to change prop of red, green, or blue, and the amount that we want to change red, green, or blue by. So when we call dispatch, we're going to pass in an object. We'll give it a property of color to change. We want to change the color red, so I'll pass that in as a string. And then we need to also provide the amount. And so that's going to be our color increment constant that we defined at the very top of this file. In this case, we're trying to increase color, so I'm going to pass in a positive color increment. Okay, so now we can duplicate that down to onDecrease. In the case of onDecrease, we're going to call dispatch again. Once again, we're going to define color to change of red, but this time for the amount, we want to do -1 times color increment, like so, because now we want to decrease our color. So we're going to essentially add a negative number. All right, so now we can essentially repeat these two dispatch statements for all of our different color counters. I'm going to zoom out for a second just so you can see that line very easily. And then I'll write in my dispatch statements for color counter blue and color counter green as well. So I'll do my dispatch for the second one. Color to change in this case will be, not green, but blue. The amount will be color increment. Then we'll do our next dispatch. This will have a color change, color to change. Sorry, typo there. Color to change in both cases of blue. And our amount will be color increment. And this one needs to be negative. So I'll once again do -1 times color increment. And now we'll repeat that once again. So dispatch, color to change, green, amount is color increment, And then finally dispatch for the negative case, color to change, green, amount, color increment. Okay, there we go. There's all three of them put together. So we've now got three very distinct action objects. Well, I guess 6 once again. Then technically, we've got color to change of red with a positive color increment and a negative. So yeah, really 6 in total. Now the very last thing we have to do to test all this out, back down inside of our view element down here, remember that square that we're giving a background color to, right now we're referencing red, green, and blue. Red, green, and blue are no longer defined inside of our component. Instead, red, green, and blue are nested inside of the state object. So we can either update red, green, and blue right here to be like state.red, state.green, and state.blue. But another way to do this would be to use a little bit of destructuring. Let's try doing that instead. So to use some destructuring, we could write out const red, green, blue is coming from state, like so. So now we have access to the variables red, green, and blue inside of our component once again. We could alternatively try to destructure off of this state value inside of here, like inside the array, but honestly, that might make things a little bit too confusing right now, so I'm just going to leave this as is. Okay, so I'm going to save this, and we'll do a quick test. Now, if you see any errors inside of your device, first thing to do, remember, try to reload the application. If you're on a physical device, you can do that by shaking the phone. You should see the development menu come up. You can hit Reload JavaScript. If you're on an emulator or simulator, you can hit the Reload button down here at the bottom. And eventually, we should get back to our home screen. If you don't see the home screen appear, and if you only see a red screen saying that there's some typo, I can absolutely guarantee you made a typo in the code we just wrote. So please triple check whatever code you just wrote. The error message will give you a very distinct line number to look at. The error message that's coming up might tell you to look at a line number that's slightly underneath whatever typo you just made, however. So do be sure to look a little bit above or below or whatever else. All right, so go to my square demo, and I'll do increase red. Yep, getting red. Back to black. There's blue. And there's green as well. Oh, looks like we might have a little typo here. So I'm hitting decrease green, but the color's just getting more and more green. So chances are we probably made a typo. Yep, I definitely did. So on my amount right here, I have color increment positive. I never multiplied by -1. Let me take care of that really quickly. That's better. So on my green, I've got an amount of -1 times color increment. Now I can test again. Increase green. That's better. Okay, so that's pretty much it. That is our first experience at using reducers. Now, I know that this is probably seem really over the top, like way more complicated than it needs to be. And I agree with you 100%. Don't get me wrong. The code we wrote inside of here may be not the best approach for handling just a simple color changing application. The reason we use this pattern is that it's going to make handling data and managing state inside of more complex applications way easier than if we were trying to use separate state variables. So this is kind of a contrived example where it's kind of hard to see the benefits, but eventually we're going to work on way more complicated applications where using this pattern is going to be a huge blessing. And we're going to be really happy that we learned how to use reducers like this. All right, so we still have one last thing to do. Remember, we need to make sure that we add in some validation to make sure that we don't increase or decrease any of our colors by too much. So let's take care of that in the next video.